The rope burned through Annie McAllister's palms as she hauled the water bucket from the well. 24 years old, and her hands already looked like her mother's had at 40. The Nebraska sun beat down merciless, same as always, but today felt different. Heavy, wrong. Her sister's scream cut through the morning air. Annie dropped the bucket water, spilling across the cracked earth as she ran toward the house. Through the kitchen window, she could see them all gathered like vultures around fresh death. Her father Thomas stood rigid by the stove, faced dark as storm clouds. Her mother Margaret sat at the table, hands folded so tight her knuckles had gone white. And there was Evelyn, sobbing prettily into a lace handkerchief. Even in distress, Evelyn was beautiful. Golden hair catching light porcelain skin unmarked by ouch, or labor blue eyes swimming with tears that somehow made them sparkle more. Annie burst through the door. "What's happened?" "Tell her," Thomas commanded, voice cold as January wind. Evelyn's sobs intensified. "I can't marry him, Annie. I simply can't. A rancher in Wyoming territory living in some hovel in the wilderness? I'd rather die." Annie's stomach dropped. For 6 months, Evelyn had exchanged letters with Jesse Hartland, responding to his advertisement for a mail-order bride. The family had celebrated when he'd sent money for her passage west. One less mouth to feed a respectable marriage for their beautiful daughter. "You gave your word," Margaret said quietly, though her eyes held sympathy for her favorite child. "I was confused. I didn't know what I was agreeing to. Besides, Samuel Morrison has been calling on me. He owns the general store. I could stay here near civilization, near family." "Enough," Thomas slammed his fist on the table. "You took that man's money, made promises, this family's reputation, then let Annie go." The words fell like stones into still water. Silence. Annie felt every eye turn to her. "What?" she whispered. Evelyn straightened, tears miraculously ceasing. "Mr. Hartland has never seen me. We've only exchanged letters and that photograph where you can barely make out features. Annie could go in my place. She's more suited to that kind of life anyway. More suited because she was plain, because she was already worn down by work, because no one in town would offer for her with Evelyn available." "That's dishonest," Annie said. "Is it?" Thomas studied her with calculating eyes. "You're both McAllister daughters. He advertised for a bride, he'll get one." His lips curved cruel. "What prospects do you have here? Think any man's going to court you when your sister's available." The truth stung worse than any slap. Annie had watched men's eyes slide past her to Evelyn for years, served refreshments at socials while Evelyn danced, minded the farm while Evelyn attended church picnics. "I won't lie to him." "Then tell him the truth when you arrive. Let him decide. But you'll go, girl. You'll honor this family's commitment." "Father, please." "It's decided. You leave Thursday morning." The barn cat emerged from beneath the porch, one ear torn from some recent fight. It limped toward the well, favoring its right front paw. Annie watched it drink from the spilled water, understanding something about damaged things making do. Thunder rumbled in the distance, though no clouds marked the sky. The chickens scattered toward their coop wings, flapping in panic. Even they knew a storm was coming. 2 days to pack what little she owned. 2 days to prepare for a life she'd never chosen with a man who'd never chosen her. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in Cheyenne, Wyoming territory. Annie's legs trembled as she stepped down, dust coating her traveling dress like grave dirt. The driver tossed her small trunk to the ground with casual indifference. "Miss McAllister." The voice was deep-weathered. Annie turned to face Jesse Hartland for the first time. He stood well over 6 feet, broad shoulders stretching his clean but faded shirt. Dark hair showed beneath his black hat, and his face was angular, carved by sun and wind. But it was his eyes that stopped her. Gray as winter sky, serious, searching, and confused. "I'm Annie McAllister, Evelyn's sister." His brow furrowed. "Sister." "Evelyn couldn't come. She changed her mind about the marriage. My father sent me in her place." The words tumbled out. "I know this isn't what you expected. I understand if you want to send me back on the next coach." Jesse studied her for a long moment. Annie forced herself to stand still under his scrutiny, though she wanted to smooth her travel-worn dress or tuck away strands of brown hair that had escaped her bonnet. She knew what he saw. A plain woman with work-roughened hands and sun-touched skin. Nothing like the golden beauty in the photograph. "You traveled 5 days alone." "Yes, through territory that's still half wild where Indians and outlaws might cause trouble." The coach was well guarded. "To marry a man you've never met, a man who wasn't even writing to you." Annie lifted her chin. To honor my family's obligation and tell you the truth so you could choose. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth exactly, but a slight softening around the eyes. I see. He picked up her trunk as if it weighed nothing. My wagon's this way. But don't you want to? It's near dark. There won't be another coach for 3 days. You'll come to the ranch tonight. We can sort this out tomorrow. The wagon ride passed in silence, broken only by the creak of wheels and steady clop of hooves. Stars appeared more than Annie had ever seen in Nebraska. The man beside her remained quiet, but she sensed him watching her from the corner of his eye. When lights appeared in the distance, he spoke. That's the ranch. As they drew closer, Annie could make out the shapes of buildings. A 2-story house, large barn, several outbuildings. More substantial than she'd expected, speaking of hard work and careful planning. The house itself was simple but well built, with a covered porch and glass windows that must have cost dearly to freight out here. Jesse helped her down, his hands lingering at her waist for just a moment before he stepped back. I'll bring your trunk in. The house isn't much, but it's clean. I hired a woman from town to ready things, expecting. He didn't finish. Inside, everything spoke of a man living alone, function over comfort. A stone fireplace sofa that looked barely used rocking chair near the window. In the kitchen, Jesse ladled beef stew into a bowl and set it before her with a chunk of bread. He poured coffee from a pot on the stove, then sat across from her at the scarred wooden table. Can you cook? He asked abruptly. Yes. Keep house, tend a garden. Yes. Handle livestock, birth calves if needed. I was raised on a farm. He nodded slowly. And you can read and write, obviously, though the letters were Evelyn's. Annie finished the sentence. I'm sorry for the deception. You didn't deceive me, your sister did, your father did. His jaw tightened, but not you. After she'd eaten, he showed her to a small, clean room with a narrow bed and washstand. There's water in the pitcher, privy's out back. I rise at dawn. Mr. Hartland, Annie said as he turned to go, what will you decide about me? He paused in the doorway, face half in shadow. I advertised for a wife, Miss McAllister, a partner to share this life. Your sister promised that in her letters, then broke her word. You came here knowing I might reject you, but you came anyway. Told me the truth anyway. He was quiet for a moment. I'll decide based on who you are not, who you aren't. He closed the door, leaving Annie alone. Through the window, she could see the vast Wyoming sky stars scattered like spilled salt across black velvet. She thought of Evelyn probably being courted by Samuel Morrison right now, laughing in their parents' warm parlor. Thunder rumbled in the distance, real thunder this time, and through the window she glimpsed lightning flickering behind the mountains. A storm was building, and she was alone in a strange house with a man who might send her away come morning. But she hadn't run, and he hadn't asked her to. That was something. Dawn broke with the sound of roosters and distant cattle. Annie dressed quickly in her second-best dress, taking extra care with her hair, though she couldn't say why. Downstairs she found the kitchen empty, but heard Jesse working in the barn. Without thinking, she began making breakfast. By the time he entered, stamping boots on the threshold, she had biscuits, browning bacon, sizzling coffee strong enough to wake the dead. He stopped short, taking in the scene. You didn't have to. I'm used to being useful, Annie said, not turning from the stove. Sit, it's almost ready. They ate in silence, but it wasn't strained. Jesse studied her covertly, the way she moved efficiently around his kitchen, how she handled everything like it belonged to her, but never assumed it did. This is good, he said after the first bite. It's just breakfast. Been a long time since anyone cooked for me like this. After breakfast, Jesse pushed back from the table. I need to speak plain with you, Miss McAllister. Annie's stomach tightened. I appreciate directness. I need a wife, not for decoration or social calls. There's precious little society out here anyway. I need a partner, someone who can handle the work, the isolation, the hard seasons. Someone who won't fold up and blow away when winter winds hit or summer drought burns everything brown. I understand. Do you... His eyes searched hers. The nearest neighbor is Hattie Rose Fletcher, 8 miles east. Town's a day's ride. In winter, we might be cut off for weeks. There's no fancy goods, no socials every week, no family visiting for Sunday dinner. Annie met his gaze steadily. Mr. Hartland, I've spent my life working. I know isolation. Being in a crowded room and still being alone because no one sees you past your prettier sister. I can work your garden, tend your house, help with stock if needed. I'm not afraid of hard seasons. Jesse was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood. Come with me. He led her outside into the crisp morning air. The ranch spread before them, sturdy barn corrals holding horses and milk cows, chickens scratching in the yard. Mountains rose in the distance, peaks already crowned with snow. 200 acres, Jesse said. Built it up from nothing after the war. Every fence post, every building placed with these hands. He flexed his scarred fingers. It's not much compared to some spreads, but it's mine. Ours if, he stopped. If you decide to keep me, Annie finished. If we decide to suit each other, he corrected. I'm not an easy man, Miss McAllister. The war left its marks. I have moods. Dark days. I work from dawn past dusk. I don't talk much. I'm not an easy woman, Annie replied. I speak my mind. I'm plain as a fence post. I can't sing or play piano. I'll never be the ornament Evelyn would have been. I don't need an ornament. His voice was rough. I need someone real. A rider appeared on the horizon, moving fast. Jesse's hand moved instinctively to his hip, though he wore no gun. The gesture suggested he once had. The rider resolved into a young man, perhaps 20, with sandy hair and an easy smile. He pulled up in a cloud of dust. Morning, Jesse. This the new Mrs. Hartland. Miss McAllister, Jesse corrected. Annie, this is Jonah Cooper. He helps when I need an extra hand. Jonah's smile widened, his appreciation obvious. Pleased to meet you, miss. Welcome to Wyoming territory. Jesse here's a lucky man. Heat rose in Annie's cheeks. It had been years since any man looked at her with such open admiration. Just Jonah, he said. Everyone calls me Jonah. He turned to Jesse. Came to tell you that fence in the north pasture's down again. Thompson's ornery steers pushed through. Jesse's jaw tightened. Third time this month. Want me to round them up? We'll both go. Need to have words with Thompson about keeping his stock on his own land. Jesse glanced at Annie. I'll be back by midday. I'll be here, she said simply. She watched them ride off, noting how Jonah kept turning to look back. Jesse sat his horse like he was born to it, back straight, moving as one with the animal. Annie turned to survey her temporary domain. If Jesse decided to send her back, at least she could leave things better than she found them. She started with the house opening windows to air out the bachelor staleness. Found Jesse's bedroom upstairs, sparse as a monk's cell. The bed made with military precision, Bible on the nightstand. In a trunk at the foot of the bed, she discovered a Union uniform carefully folded, and beneath it, letters tied with string. All addressed to Sergeant Jesse Hartland, the newest dated 1865. By the time she heard horses approaching, Annie had bread-rising beans soaking for supper and had beaten the parlor rug clean. That evening, Jonah stayed for supper. He talked enough for all three, telling stories of ranch life, asking Annie about Nebraska, complimenting everything from the beans to the wildflowers she'd picked for the table. Jesse grew quieter as the meal progressed, gray eyes moving between Annie and Jonah. When Jonah offered to help with dishes, Jesse intervened. Getting late, best head home before full dark. Right you are, Miss Annie, pleasure dining with you. Hope to do it again soon. After he left, Annie and Jesse cleaned up in silence. As she washed and he dried, the weight of decision hung between them. He's a good man, Jesse said finally. Young, enthusiastic, has his own place starting up. He'd court you proper if you... Is that what you've decided? Jesse set down the plate he was drying. In the lamplight, his face was all shadows and angles. I haven't decided anything except this house already feels different with you in it. One day and it feels alive. Annie's heart skipped. Houses need tending, like gardens, like everything else out here. Yes, Jesse agreed quietly. They do. Outside, thunder rumbled closer. The storm that had been building was almost here. The storm struck at midnight. Annie woke to the sound of thunder like artillery fire and the urgent lowing of cattle in distress. Through her window, she could see Jesse already moving across the yard, his slicker whipping in the wind. She dressed quickly, pulling on her sturdiest dress and the old boots Jesse had found for her. By the time she reached the kitchen, rain hammered the windows with violent force. Through the chaos, she could barely make out Jesse and Jonah struggling near the barn. Annie grabbed her shawl and plunged into the storm. The wind nearly knocked her down, rain soaking through instantly. She fought her way to the barn where Jesse was trying to calm a panicked mare. Get back to the house, he shouted over the storm. What's wrong? Fence down in the east pasture, cattle scattered. One of the calves. Thunder drowned his words, but Annie saw Jonah pointing toward the creek. Her heart sank. The creek that was usually a gentle trickle would be a raging torrent now. I'll help, she shouted back. Jesse's face was a mask of rain and frustration. It's too dangerous. I grew up with storms. Tell me what to do. For a moment, she thought he'd refuse. Then lightning illuminated his face and she saw him make a decision. Stay with Jonah. Help him get the herd back to the near pasture. I'll go after the calf. He was gone before she could protest, disappearing into the gray sheets of rain. What followed was a battle against nature itself. Annie had worked cattle before, but never in conditions like these. Rain turned the ground treacherous. The cattle, normally docile, were wild with fear. She and Jonah fought to turn them using horses in determination to guide the panicked animals away from danger. Through it all, Annie's thoughts kept turning to Jesse out there alone. The creek would be deadly now, banks crumbling, water racing with debris. One slip, one moment's inattention. There, Jonah pointed. We got them. Where's Jesse? Annie was already turning her horse. The creek. He went after a calf. They rode hard toward the creek, the storm showing signs of weakening. Rain still fell, but thunder was moving east. As they crested a rise, Annie saw him. Jesse was in the creek, waist-deep in rushing water, struggling with something. The calf trapped against a fallen log, bawling in terror. Jesse was trying to free it, but the current kept threatening to sweep him downstream. Jesse! Annie screamed, but wind tore the word away. She slid from her horse before Jonah could stop her slipping down the muddy bank. Water was shockingly cold current, stronger than she'd imagined. But Jesse was there fighting alone. Annie, no. Jesse saw her coming, face mixing anger and fear. Get back! Instead, she waded deeper, grabbing a sturdy root to anchor herself. Together, she shouted. We do it together. For a heartbeat, he stared at her soaked, muddy, stubborn Annie McAllister, who wouldn't leave him to fight alone. Then he nodded, and together they worked to free the terrified calf. It happened fast. The log shifted, the calf pulled free, and the current caught Jesse off balance. Annie saw him go under brown water closing over his head, and her heart stopped. Jesse! She lunged forward, hand finding his shirt, hauling with strength born of desperation. Jonah was there, suddenly adding his strength. Together they dragged Jesse to shallow water, all of them gasping. Jesse coughed up water, face pale beneath mud. Damn fool thing to do, he gasped. Annie didn't know if he meant his actions or hers. Yes, she agreed, still gripping his shirt. It was. Back at the house, they stripped off soaked outer clothes. Annie stoked the fire, set water to heat, moved with efficiency of someone who'd weathered crises before. But her hands shook as she poured coffee, remembering that moment when water closed over Jesse's head. You could have been killed, Jesse said quietly, studying her with gray eyes. It could have taken you, Annie countered. Did you think I'd just stand on the bank and watch? Most women would have. I'm not most women. No, Jesse agreed, something warm flickering in his gaze. You're not. Later, as wind rose and clouds gathered again, Annie stood at the window watching trees sway. Jesse brought in firewood. When he entered, she turned to him. If I carry your child, she said plainly, I want them to have a name, a home. I want to belong here. You do, he said. You already do. But I mean fully, not as someone rescued, not as a guest, as your wife. He set the firewood down, crossed the room. Without ceremony, he took a ring from the shelf where it had rested, his late wife's ring, and handed it to her. You sure? She nodded. Yes. He slipped it on her finger. Her hands trembled slightly. Then you're my wife, not by law, by choice, mine and yours. That night, they lay together without urgency. They undressed slowly, not from nervousness, but intention. When they came together, it was quiet like before, but this time with purpose. There was no past in the room now. Only present, only the promise of what came next. Afterwards, she rested with her cheek against his chest. He stroked her hair. If it's a boy, she whispered, we name him after your father. Jesse smiled faintly. And if it's a girl, we let her name herself. He kissed her forehead. Then they lay still, listening to wind move through trees as if the land outside was starting to breathe again. So were they. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning in May, carried by a rider from town. Jesse's face was unreadable as he held out the envelope to Annie, who was hanging wash on the line. It's from Nebraska, he said quietly. Your sister's handwriting. Annie's hand stilled on the wet sheet. Of course Evelyn would write now, when Annie had finally found her footing, finally begun to believe in the life she was building. Do you want to read it alone? Jesse asked. Annie set down the clothespins with careful precision. No, whatever she has to say, you should hear it too. Her fingers trembled as she broke the seal. Evelyn's flowery script sprawled across the page, decorative and insubstantial as lace. Dearest Annie, she read aloud, I hope this letter finds you well, though I confess I worry constantly about your situation. How you must be suffering exiled to that desolate place because of father's stubbornness. Jesse made a sound that might have been disgust. I write with wonderful news. Samuel Morrison has released me from our understanding. He found my sacrifice in sending you away too painful to bear, knowing how I must pine for the life I was meant to have. Annie's hands tightened on the paper. I have convinced father that the whole arrangement was a terrible mistake. Mr. Hartland surely sees by now that you cannot possibly fulfill the role of a proper rancher's wife. I am prepared to honor my original commitment. Mr. Hartland need only send word, and I will come immediately to take my rightful place. The kitchen was silent except for the ticking clock and distant cattle. She's wrong, Jesse said, finally, a voice rough with suppressed emotion. Is she? Annie heard bitterness creep into her voice. She's beautiful, accomplished. She's wrong, Jesse repeated firmly. He moved around the table, taking Annie's shoulders in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. Annie, I need you to hear this. Really hear it. Annie looked up at him, seeing her reflection in his gray eyes. Plain, practical Annie with work-worn hands and weather-touched skin. Your sister writes pretty letters, Jesse said slowly. But that's all they were. Pretty words on paper meaning nothing. She wrote about parties I'd never attend, people I'd never meet, a life that has nothing to do with this place. I was lonely enough to think that didn't matter. Fool enough to believe beauty could survive out here without substance behind it. His hands tightened on her shoulders. You came here expecting rejection, but you worked anyway. You saw what needed doing and did it without being asked. You stood in a storm beside me. Risked your life for a calf that wasn't even yours yet. You've made this house a home in ways I didn't even know it was lacking. But she's selfish, Jesse interrupted, anger flashing in his eyes. She broke her word, sent you in her place like you were worth less, and now wants to sweep in and claim what she threw away because her other option failed. That's not beauty, Annie. That's ugliness dressed in silk. Annie felt tears burn her eyes. I've spent my whole life being second to her. Then stop, Jesse said simply. You're not second here. You're not a substitute or replacement. You're Annie, and you're who I choose. Today, tomorrow, and every day after. He reached past her to pick up the letter. What do you want to do with this? Annie looked at the letter, at Evelyn's careless words that even now had power to wound. Then she looked at Jesse's face, serious and certain, waiting for her decision. Burn it, she said quietly. After the wedding, we'll burn it together. Something shifted in Jesse's expression. Pride, perhaps, or relief. Good. He paused, slight flush creeping up his neck. Now I believe we should ride to town. See the preacher about making this official. You sure? Jesse touched her cheek, gesture so gentle it made her heart ache. 3 hours, Annie. 3 hours and it's done. Legal and binding and permanent. Your sister can write all the letters she wants. The wedding was simple, just them, Reverend Morrison, Hattie Rose as witness, and Jonah looking proud as if he'd arranged the match himself. Annie wore her best gray dress with wildflowers in her hair. Jesse wore his good shirt, freshly shaved, his dark hair carefully combed. When Jesse took her hands at the altar, they were steady and sure. When he spoke his vows, his voice carried across the small chapel like a promise that would outlast the mountains themselves. I, Jesse, take you, Annie, not as second choice or substitute, but as my true partner, my equal, my wife. Annie's voice was clear as she responded. I, Annie, take you, Jesse, not from obligation or settling, but from choice. Free choice made with my whole heart. The kiss was soft, certain, and when they turned to face their small congregation, Annie saw Hattie Rose wiping her eyes with a practical cotton handkerchief. Afterward, as they drove home in the wagon, Annie felt something settle inside her. Not just contentment, but rightness. The kind of deep satisfaction that comes from being exactly where you belong. Any regrets? Jesse asked as they approached the ranch. Annie looked at the land spread before them, their land now officially and truly. The house where she'd learned to hope, the barn where they'd weathered storms together, the garden she'd coaxed back to life with her own hands. My only regret, she said, is that I spent so many years believing I was second choice when I was really just waiting for the right person to choose me first. Jesse's hand found hers, calloused and warm. Forever, Annie. That's what I promised at our wedding, and that's what I meant. Forever. That evening they stood together on the porch as sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The letter from Evelyn lay in ashes in their fireplace, along with all the doubt and comparison and what might have been it represented. No more ghosts, Jesse said quietly. No more wondering if you were second choice. You were my true choice, Annie. My only choice. The one I'll keep choosing every day for the rest of our lives. Under the vast Wyoming sky, Annie McAllister Hartland felt the last of her old fears blow away like dust in the wind. She had been chosen, truly chosen, not for what she could pretend to be, but for exactly who she was. And that was worth more than all the beauty and wealth in the world.